I had pinned my entire existence, my entire life on this one moment.
The exit.
The exit. It was supposed to fill that hole, and it didn't. I couldn't believe it.
Success in life is often subjective, but there's something about business or monetary success that most people tend to agree on, which is the bigger the business, the more money equals the more success you have in life. And while that can contribute to your overall life success, it won't make you exactly feel whole. Although today's guest, Josh Payne, he thought that it could, which meant that when he finally got his big exit and sold his company for a ton of money, instead of the euphoric and fulfilling life event that he was looking for, he got the opposite.
I think I slipped into a really dark period in my life for probably, another year to year and a half, I would say.
In today's episode, we're going to talk to Josh. So Josh sold his company and he made something like $60 million after taxes at a very young age. And Josh is going to open up, just like we do on every Moneywise episode. He's going to open up on his finances, so his monthly spend, his portfolio, and things like that. But we're also going to talk about that period after he sold. And Josh's story, it's more than just the exit. It's his entire journey. His emotional well-being, it was tied directly to his business success. And in this episode, we're going to hear about when it all came to a head and how he got himself out of it and why this time, his new business, he's running it so much differently. And if you are just starting a company, or hell, even if you already have a company, I think you're going to like to hear the changes of how someone who can set their business up in any way possible, how they've set up their company. And so, my friends, I am Sam Parr, and this is Moneywise. You can scroll through Instagram for just 30 seconds. You're going to see a ton of stuff out there on how to get rich, but none that teach you how to handle life after you've already made a little bit of money. And I'm the co-founder of a company called Hampton. You can check it out, joinhampton.com. Go ahead. You've listened to this podcast a bunch. Just go ahead, check out the homepage, joinhampton.com. It's a community of CEOs, business owners, things like that. Our members range from startups with just 10 employees to publicly traded companies with hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. And because of this thing that I call Hampton, I'm able to see all of these amazing and these private conversations about money. So we're talking like people who are very wealthy, sometimes billionaires, and they're talking all about money very publicly in Hampton. And I think a lot of these conversations, they should happen in public, and hence this podcast, Moneywise. So with this podcast, Moneywise, we talk to a ton of people, including, by the way, a lot of Hampton members, and we want to talk to them about money, and we want to get them to be radically transparent about their numbers, meaning their monthly expenses, their income, their portfolio, things like that. But more importantly, all the issues and problems that come with being successful and how they're solving those problems. And of course, I've said this a bunch of times, but this podcast, it's not free. It costs a little bit of money, except I don't want you to give me money. All I want you to do is click subscribe. So if you're on YouTube, if you're on iTunes, Spotify, just click subscribe if you've listened to more than one episode, and that way we're even. And if you're the CEO of a startup, check it out, joinhampton.com. You're going to be part of an 8-person group that we handpick for you, and you're going to meet in real life with that 8-person group. It's like your personal board of advisors, as well as having access to thousands of other members. So check it out, again, joinhampton.com. And by the way, it's November. I got a little bit of cold. My voice, it sounds just a little bit lower than normal, so my apologies. Thanks for bearing with me. Before we draw it out any further, I want to get to the details right away. So we're going to talk about the exit details in order to get a better sense of the anticlimactic climax we're talking about. In the deal, Josh ended up selling his business, StackCommerce, for roughly $80 million. And because he didn't raise a lot of funding, he owned most of the company.
Yeah, about like 75%.
And so because Josh didn't raise a lot of funding, he owned 75% of the business when he sold it, which brought him in personally at the time around $50 million. And that was in 2020. And so this is how much he is worth today.
Like 60 million probably.
All right. How much is liquid or liquid-ish?
Like 40.
We're going to talk about how he got there, but first, let's start with his why.
I think it's an interesting thing to think about people's origin story and why they start in the beginning. And I think this podcast, or a lot of people might assume like, hey, like people start companies to make money. And yes, but why? Like, why do people want money, right? They want to feel validated, or they want to feel loved, or they want to feel special, and there's a lot of things that I think happen in our childhoods or traumatic events that sort of guide that. And so for me, I think I was looking to feel more complete, or I don't know, I don't know how to say it, just more okay.
So let's go back to his origin story.
I was born in Southern Indiana.
Oh, that's cool. I'm from Missouri, so we both have that in common.
Yeah, Midwest.
Were your parents into business or were they just like normal Midwest people?
Super normal Midwest people. They actually grew up incredibly poor, like farmers in Kentucky. My dad grew up on a tobacco farm. My mom also grew up on a farm. Her parents worked in the distilleries in Kentucky, and so they grew up like truly dirt poor. We didn't grow up dirt poor, but we were definitely, I would say, like lower middle class. And my dad was always in sales, so he sold a lot of different things, like chemical supplies to factories, and he was an insurance salesman for a little while. He started out his career selling like encyclopedias door to door. So he was like your sort of classic old school sales guy.
Did you want to start a business because you grew up without money?
The short answer is yes. I mean, it's sort of that classic. We didn't have very much, saw other kids wearing cool clothes, Abercrombie and blah, blah, blah. We couldn't afford it. And I definitely think that created a chip on my shoulder early. And I have 4 brothers and sisters. I'm the youngest of 5. And it is unique to me though. Like they also grew up in the same circumstance and they had no desire to be entrepreneurs. They weren't distraught about not having money in the same way that I was.
Yeah, I grew up in the Midwest too. I'm also the youngest and none of my other siblings wanted the same thing. So I think everyone just kind of like absorbs information differently, I guess. You went to IU, right?
Yeah, I went to IU for undergrad and I was there during the dot-com era. So technology was like just getting interesting, but finance was really the thing. Like everyone was still making money as like everyone who wanted to make money wanted to be an investment banker. That was the big thing. But I wanted to do tech. And so then I graduated and I got really lucky in '01 and got an internship with Intel and somehow like made my way out to Silicon Valley. And I was like, holy shit, like this is what the world has to offer. Like I was stuck in like dumpy little town and then I get shipped out to Silicon Valley. And to me, it was like super eye-opening and I loved it. And so, I went to work there with Intel as my ticket out of school. I was at Intel for years. Like I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur way before that when I was a kid, but I was from the Midwest. I had no framework. So like 3.5 years into Intel, I still couldn't figure it out, but I hated that place. Or I hated, working in corporate America, quit that job, applied to business school just because I figured,
That's what you do.
that's what you do, right? I mean, I talked to all the smartest people in the Valley and they're like, well, you should just go back to business school. So I applied to business school, got in, actually traveled the world for 6 months ahead of that, which was a lot of fun. And then went to Duke for business school. I did a stint in venture capital there. I was the president of the Entrepreneurship Club. So like really kind of was getting into it. But yet again, it was 2008 when I graduated. So it was like crazy financial times. I intentionally didn't look for a job, flew back out to Silicon Valley upon graduation, and then got a job with this startup called Meebo, which was like a Sequoia-backed company. It was a darling of that like Web 2.0 era. And worked there for a year. I actually got fired, which was devastating at the time. But like truly probably the only reason I started a company.
The first company, it didn't really go anywhere.
So sort of like the Facebook newsfeed before the Facebook newsfeed, I think, or maybe like right around that same time. But anyway, there was a lot of privacy concerns, so that didn't get very far.
But eventually, he would start the one that did.
Then I created the company that I built called StackCommerce.
Dude, I was looking at your revenue growth. Like it was pretty outstanding. Do you remember, like, what was the revenue for each year's 1 through 5? Do you remember?
Oh, it was absolutely insane. So first of all, just to set the stage, I mean, we raised $750,000 in seed funding, really never touched it, and we're profitable essentially from day one. But year 1, we did 2 million. Year 2, we did 6 million. Year 3, 16 million. Year 4, 26 million. Year 5, 32 million.
Wow. By the way, how much money did Josh have when he started that business?
I mean, I had nothing. I don't know, $5,000 in my bank account.
Wow, $5,000 and you raised $700,000. Was the business making a lot of profit along the way that you could pay yourself?
So those first years, year 1, I didn't pay myself anything. Like I'd almost say like year 0, I didn't pay myself anything because there was sort of the precursor to launching. And then year 1, I think I paid myself like 60 grand. And then like 75 year 2, 90 year 3. And then I think 150 was really kind of that number that I was like, okay, like 150 is a lot. and felt really good about like that I was paying myself 150 in year like 4. Year 5, I got married. So that sort of changed things. I wanted to buy a house. We were at that point doing 7 figures of EBITDA. So I think I paid myself like 200 or maybe even 250 that year.
That's the thing, by the way, when you look for validation and fulfillment, when it's basically all comes from business success. It means that when the highs come, and sometimes they do, they go really high, especially in those early days. But the lows, they always come. And by the way, they probably come a lot more often than the highs.
So like year 6 is kind of when things slowed, right? So we kind of hit 15 to 20% year on year growth.
Did 15%, because like if you have a business that's like becoming matured, 15%, that's not bad. That's not bad at all for annual growth. But I imagine like in the day to day, does that feel boring? What's that feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone is different. For me, that period was sort of the trough of sorrow because we had been doubling and tripling every year over year, right? So I had sort of set up this expectation. They say, happiness equals results minus expectations.
Yeah, it's that gap.
Yeah, I ballooned up the expectations. Oh, we're going to double forever. And so when we were doing that period of 15 to 20% year over year growth, dude, we were doing, like I said, 2 or 3 million of EBITDA every single year, growing 20% year on year. I mean, it's not bad, right? Like we were close to the rule of 40, which is if you add up your growth and your EBITDA percentage, you want to be at a minimum of 40%. And we were pretty close, but something was going on inside of me where I was really negative about that period, right? And really fearful. And it wasn't only that I was bored, it was worse than that for me.
Was it fearful like this is going to go away?
Yeah. I think that was probably the feeling, like, yes.
I felt that exact same way. And looking back at it, I think that past experiences are hard to analyze because you have so much bias. I look back at a situation and I know I felt miserable then, but that seems kind of fun to go back in that situation now. So it's hard to like analyze the situation entirely. But I look back at the times when I thought this is going to go away, and I think, well, I should have known it wasn't going to go away, or like this is normal to feel, or that it's not life or death necessarily. But that's easy now, of course, to say because I know the outcome. But looking back, were you correct to feel like it could go away?
Yes and no. Yes, and that there are always existential threats to any company. If your company is, completely tied to one channel of revenue or marketing, we were fairly diverse though. Like we had a lot of big revenue partners, and the reality is that the business could have declined. But I think what I realized later through executive coaching and frankly therapy is I am incredibly resilient, and I wasn't believing in my resilience and my innovation. And even if Stack had gone down, like I was afraid I was going to go down with it. And I think you have to believe in your own capability and just know, like I know who I am now. And it took me a long time to figure that out. But back then I didn't quite believe in myself. I wasn't as grounded and as stable as I am now. And I wish I could go back and tell that person, to believe. But that's partially why I started a second company. And that's partially why I've been sort of writing content, is to like get first-time entrepreneurs to understand the right way to think.
That personal low period was just a foreshadow of what was to come. Instead of realizing that he was on a fruitless journey, he got caught up in chasing the next high. And that next one, it was the exit. We're going to tell you that story and all the numbers right after a quick break.
How long did the process take to sell?
It was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. And it was about 6 months. Yeah, from the first time we ever spoke to closing date was 6 months. But from LOI to close was about 3 months.
Oh,
so 3 months from LOI to close, but it took about 2 or 3 months to get to LOI.
Was your lifestyle, that's a big company. Was your lifestyle great at that point, or were you living well below your means? What was your monthly spend, do you think?
No, we had a good lifestyle because at that point we were continued to do this sort of a couple million in EBITDA until the year of the sale, we did a lot more in EBITDA. But prior to that, a couple million. And so, yeah, I started to do the salary. I kept the same salary that I had from before.
250.
Yeah. But then I would take down a bonus based on our EBITDA. So if it was 1 million, I might take a smaller bonus if it was 2 million, a little bit bigger if it was 3 million, a little bit bigger. We were doing pretty well. We had moved to a bigger home, probably spending, including our mortgage and everything, 25 grand a month.
And you felt great there.
Felt great. I remember, look, I grew up super cheap and I carried a lot of those things with me. And so, yeah, I was still pretty conservative and, my friends might say fairly cheap at that time, even in that situation. But there was nothing that we couldn't really do that we wanted to do. Like, I don't remember at that stage worrying about money much.
So why sell it all?
It's different for everyone, but there were like a couple things for me. I mean, I think the biggest one was emotional, right? The biggest one, and this might be different than a lot of people. I don't really know. But I mean, for me, I think it came down to some aspect of affirmation, some external thing that I needed to validate me. And it's funny, I think I thought it was the money. I thought that success would be this thing that would make me okay, sort of complete me, if you will, and yeah, it definitely turned out different than what I thought.
What fell short of the expectations?
The money sort of hit my bank account and I was super elated for a couple weeks. And once that wore off, what I noticed, I'm part of YPO, and I remember going to my forum and, it's 10 guys in this forum and, they're like, Josh, it's your turn to talk. Like, tell us about the sale. And, they were like on the edge of their seats, like getting ready to high five me. And I just like break down in tears and I'm crying. And, and they're like, oh my God, like what happened? And for me, like what I realized was that the money didn't take that monkey off my back. There was a hole inside of me that I thought all the money and the success and the accolades was going to fill. And it just didn't. And I couldn't believe it. I was actually incredibly devastated because I had worked my whole life up to this moment. I had pinned my entire existence, my entire life on this one moment.
The exit.
And it was supposed to make everything okay. It was supposed to fill that hole. And it didn't. And I was like, I couldn't believe it. And so I think I slipped into a really dark period in my life for probably, another year to year and a half, I would say, of just going through that and figuring out like, what was this all about and who am I? And, all those things.
And you'd made like $50 million and a lot was liquid, right?
Yeah. Like 3/4 or so was liquid. Yeah. I don't know if it's 3/4, 35, like 35 out of 50 was liquid.
That didn't bring you any peace?
It has much later. You got to remember, like you asked me before, like, how were we doing before? Like, there was nothing that I really didn't have monetarily before, like with like $1 million or $2 million in the bank and a really nice home in LA, and you're making, good money. Like, there wasn't a lot missing monetarily. Like, I didn't need a ton more. I didn't have full financial security, but yeah, like it felt good. It just took a long time for me to realize the lubrication that even more, or the security that even more money provides. But I think it was something more like, for me, more emotional and more spiritual that like, I don't know if spiritual is the right word, but like that I needed to hone in on. And I think it was like around my purpose.
Josh's entire adult life had been building up to that moment. It was supposed to be that moment that when the money hit, it changed something in him, or it made him whole. A moment that when it finally came, it meant that he was finally worth something emotionally. But when it comes down to it, it's just money. And no amount of money will do that for you. Unfortunately, not even $50 million. And because he was looking for that spiritual life climax, he at first didn't even feel the tangible benefits that amount of money could bring. Today, he's able to see his wealth for the positive that it is in his life. And we're going to get to more of that. And we're going to get into the numbers and how he spends and what his views on money currently are. But before we get to that, though, we're going to find out how he got there, starting with his lowest point, the post-sale depression that had taken a hold of him.
What it looked like for me, and I can say this looking back without a ton of judgment, but we had just moved from LA to Nashville. It was kind of still COVID times, so a lot of people were inside. we had bought a new home in Nashville that was a nice home, but needed a lot of renovations. And so we were kind of in renovation hell. At the time, like contractors didn't have enough workers, they didn't have enough supply. So like we were sort of in this 3/4 built home, and we had no control over getting done any faster, right? And so it felt like so many things were out of my control. And I think what it looked like for me was frankly like a lot of self-pity and a lot of like victimization. And it took me a lot of time to realize that the focus, really didn't need to be so much on me. And like, there are so many other important people in my life, right? My kids and my wife and my purpose around them and my family. It took me a long time to see that, right? Like it should have been obvious, but for some of us, I was just really myopically focused on this goal. Like it was almost to a fault, right? Like as an A-type person, you just get so ingrained in like, oh, I need to build and sell and blah, 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 that like you lose focus of what's like truly important.
For the first year after the sale, Josh continued to work for the company. It was only after he quit that he started to understand where his depression had been coming from.
I took, we have 3 kids, and took the 3 kids and my wife, and we went to Spain for 3 months and lived in Spain. And it was the first time in over 10 years that I wasn't working 100 hours a week and like completely focused on myself and the business. And like, I think kind of found a new purpose, and I found, kind of what mattered in life. And so I think that stuff helped a lot.
I just got back from Barcelona last night or 2 nights ago.
Yeah, I love Spain. It's incredible.
It was great. But like when I sold, I loved having the time. The time was like, it genuinely made me happier.
Yeah, I'm kind of frenetic. I always need to be doing something. So like when I quit, I decided I wanted to do an Ironman because I'd never had time for that. So I started training a bunch for that. So I just kind of threw myself into something else. And that journey of doing an Ironman, by the way, was like super educational and informative in terms of like, it was interesting too.
There's this idea of the misogi. Have you heard of that?
I have.
I got obsessed with it for a long time, but basically it's this idea that like you should set like a physical goal every year where the goal is like only 50% chance that you're actually going to achieve it. And typically it has to be physical. So that's like an endurance thing or like something involving like physical pain. I'm kind of interested in that, but sometimes I get too soft and I'm like, I don't know if I feel like doing this right now, which is kind of the point of it, I think. But a lot of people, when they've achieved some type of financial success, I've noticed they need to go to some type of physical challenge where they like need to suffer physically. Is that why you decided to do it?
I think that's true. I mean, I've always loved endurance events and stuff. So I've been doing stuff like that for a while. But I think for me, it's about chasing and conquering fears. Right? Like I had this fear with the Ironman that I might drown. Like I'm not a very good swimmer. And I was like, oh, like this is, I don't think I could do it. It just like, it was a full Ironman was so overwhelming to me. It was just sort of like, yeah. And not just like, oh, I might not finish. It's a little embarrassing, but like there was sort of a little bit of fear of like, maybe it's being dramatic, but like you could die, potentially, or it was like it felt dangerous almost to it in a way. Right?
Yeah, dude, someone just died at the CrossFit games where they were swimming. Yeah, it definitely could happen.
Right. Anyway, yeah, like I think what was interesting about that is, yeah, it was a very long. I've trained for like 9 months, and during that 9 months, there were so many days that you don't want to get up and train. You kind of like have a bad workout or string of bad workouts, or you get sick and you're just like, wow, I'm not going to be able to do this. This isn't going to happen. But like you continue that process, you trust the process. And I remember crossing the finish line and just feeling like invincible. It was like the best drug I think I had ever taken. And it was,
which is funny that's the different feeling that you had when you sold of getting across like, why was one finish line cool and the other one wasn't?
That is interesting. That is a good question. I think that's when my mindset was evolving. Like I had, at that point, it was about a year-ish later, I had done a lot of therapy. By that point, I had rehired my exec coach. I had hired a triathlon coach who like doubled as my mindset coach. I think this was my process of reworking like my self-talk and how I just thought about life. And I think this was one of those milestones along my journey of reimagining how I view the world.
Now, Josh is 3 years out from coming out of his depression. He's reassessed his values, his self-worth, the importance of time, and he told me that he's the happiest today that he's ever been. And with all of that self-work and reflection, he's finally healthy enough to get the most out of the insane amount of wealth that he's made for himself.
Did you increase your monthly spending?
Yeah, we did. It's kind of funny. It kind of I would say it just sort of like slowly happened over time. And I didn't even really pay attention at all. I didn't look at my bank account. I didn't look at how much we were spending. I would not have known until I joined this group called Tiger 21, which I think I joined last year. And as a part of Tiger 21, it's similar to Hampton or YPO. You have a forum. You have to present your portfolio and say, this is exactly how much money I have. This is how it's broken down. This is where I spend it. Here's how I spend it by category. Here's how much I've made over the last year. Like it's pretty in depth.
I just did one of those presentations to my Hampton group a month ago.
Nice. That's really cool. So yeah, the spending has kind of jumped up to probably like 65, 70 a month.
Does that feel as like when you're spending 25 grand, you're like, I have everything I need. And then you start spending, I remember going from like 10,000 to like 45 or something a month. And I'm like, oh, I kind of feel the same, shockingly. At 10 or 15, I thought, I don't want anything else. And then at like 45, I'm like, I don't want anything else. And I'm like, why do I feel that same feeling?
100%. Like I don't really feel like we do all that much difference. I was like, where is this coming from? So we give 6 figures a year to donations, like in a donor advised fund. It's donated, but not actually provided to anyone, but it gives us the ability to start that donation. So there's that. And then we do a massive trip every summer, probably like 2 months, where we take the kids, and that's like super expensive. So once you take away those two things, the number actually gets a lot more, I think, normal or closer to normal. And then people ask me all the time, like, oh, like, what do you spend on? Like, what's different? And honestly, the biggest differences for me is before I would go to the grocery store and I would make sure I was buying the thing that was on sale. I probably wouldn't buy organic. If I was buying jeans, I wouldn't buy them unless they were like on sale. Even when I had a couple million in the bank, right? Like, I mean, those habits were still with me. And now my spending is just a bit more carefree. Like, we order from Instacart and we get what we want. Like, it's weird to say that, but like, I think it's the ease of decision around buying that is the biggest change. Whereas before it was like, oh, I had to think about it, or I had to wait till something was on sale.
Do you have ambitions to be worth 100 million or a billion, or do you have any money ambitions?
I don't think I have a ton of money ambitions, because based on what the people that I work with for wealth management and whatnot, there's almost no way. It would take a very catastrophic thing for me to not have enough money in life. You know what I mean? And the
How
only
old
thing
are you?
I just turned 45 2 days ago. 45.
Dude, you look way younger than 45. You look younger than me, and you're 10 years older than me. Yeah, so like with what you have now, you're never running out.
I don't think so. And the only thing that we can't have today, I say, is flying private, which we could a little bit. And then, I think there's like even bigger homes or vacation homes that we would
Wait,
love.
hold on. You don't think that's enough to fly private?
No, I don't think so. I mean, look, you could do it
What?
once. You could do it like once a year. Oh, you know what? I don't know. You probably didn't see this post. I created a new post and reposted your post about your poor kid habits. And my answer was that I still fly coach unless it's international. So that's my poor kid habit, is like, I can barely see the value in flying first, much less like flying private. Like it just doesn't make sense to me.
I mean, like if you do the math, you could spend $1.6 million a year, like 3% of 60 million, whatever. You could spend that and be totally fine.
Yeah, I mean, but there's taxes, and the problem is a lot of those are unrealized gains, right? And so you got to think about the way you invest this money is, I'm probably 30% getting dividends from private credit, investments, and the other 2/3 of that, the 40, is all unrealized. So it's in private equity deals, it's in venture deals, it's in the stock market, and we're not taking any money out of that. So you're not getting any cash back for any of that. So really, you're only making some percentage of 20, right? So let's say you're making 7% of 20 million, right? So it's like 1.5 million, and then you subtract taxes, and then so you're kind of treading water in that way.
I mean, yeah, I just think that that's being conservative. Like if you have the 60 invested like somewhat decently, I think you're all right. for the 3% rule. But I understand that it's easier for an outsider to criticize someone than it is the actual, like many people can criticize me very easily. And I could be like, well, yeah, but this reason and that reason. So it's kind of unfair, I think. But yeah, like from an outside, I am going to say that.
So do you fly? You don't fly private?
No, I've done it, but I've never paid for it. And I have the same thing that you have. That's why I said it's easy for me to criticize an outsider. But I do say that like, oh, maybe at 50 liquid, I'll do it. But I don't know if I actually ever will.
I would say the number for me is probably like 100. So I
That's
think
so funny that you said that. The number always seems to be double.
Oh, really? That is funny. 100 million to me feels like there's this term that's kind of been going around called post-economic, where money has no real meaning when you have like 100 million.
Today, Josh is happy and he's got more time to spend with his family, and he doesn't have any big financial goals, which are all the reasons you may be surprised to hear that he recently started a new business.
I have a goal. It's just not monetary. There's kind of like a couple of different goals. The first being, I kind of described it like I went through this process of building a company. It was pretty successful the whole time. And we were profitable the whole time. We grew pretty well. Yet I was terrified the whole time. Like I built that company out of fear. And I think because of that, it didn't feel the way it should have felt. It felt good, but like something was off. And so personally, I wanted to run it back and build differently for me and prove to myself that I could build out of faith and service to myself and to other people, and not out of fear. And not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. And to be honest, it's kind of been hard. It's not like, oh, it's easy. Like I'm still like, things surprise me all the time. And so I'm like sharpening myself. I think the other one is I love like running into the next me. In particular, this guy, Alex Beller, like he worked right under me for 7 years. And I like to think of him as one of those people that was sort of the next me. His company's going to be, they're going to be well, into a $1 billion plus, company, right? And getting to be a part of his story and mentoring him way back then just gives me great joy. And so as I think about now, like everybody that works for me or that I get to work with, I love like helping them on their journey to finding what I found, to doing what I did, and hopefully doing it in a more healthy way than I would have in the past. So I get a lot of joy out of that. Yeah, and then thirdly, I do have aspirations. If I have aspirations, it's probably along the lines of like an Andrew Wilkinson, in the sense that I would love to have a mini Berkshire or a conglomerate of companies in a way that like lasts like 30, 40, 50 years or 100 years. And it's multiple entities that are diversified and really interesting. And so I think that's what's interesting to me. Like, I think it's really cool that Warren Buffett and those guys, like they were in their 90s and still doing what they did. They had no monetary reason to do it. They just loved it, right? Like, and so I think it's more along those lines.
I think that everything you're saying, I'm going through all the same things. It helps to have financial security to think about some of these things. And yet I'm envious of the people who didn't have financial security and they were wise enough to start from that foundation, which is of an abundance mindset of
Yes.
I'm here to serve others, and as well as create something that can last a long time. I remember some prominent investor called my business. He said something like, "This is a great little business." And I was like, how dare you like use that word business or little, like to and then now that I see other things that I'm like, this is a great little business. And I'm like, but that's actually awesome. Like, it's kind of awesome to like have a foundation of people who love your products and services and a brand that's amazing without having to like scale like super fast and ruining things. And so I guess what I'm saying is you kind of shift from just being a hardcore capitalist to like life being richer than just money and more of a craftsman.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And I think if you ask me the biggest impact of the money, I think it's that. And it took me a couple years to find the joy in that. It took me a couple years to have that soak in. And I do think that the money provides that. So that's probably been the biggest thing, is it provides that platform or that security blanket for you to shift focus from like survival mode into like, I can do something more existential for myself and for other people too, which is really cool.
The second mountain, I think I've heard someone describe it as the second mountain.
That's exactly how I think about it.
I swear you're the gold I've been running for. On it like I woke up and won the top, bro.
Josh did what most people, myself included, they put all this emphasis on the exit, which is a lot of people who start a company, they think when I make it, like when I sell my business, or at some point, I'm going to feel like I have arrived. And to him, he had built it up to what was supposed to be this huge shift in his life, giving an emotional and spiritual reward so his life could finally feel full. I mean, think about it. You've spent a decade or more grinding your butt off, hiring people, building this amazing thing, and finally you get some outside validation, and more importantly, you get, ideally and hopefully, tons of money, enough money to never work again. And it sounds so grandiose and it sounds amazing, right? But for a lot of people who sell, you don't hear the story because frankly, it's kind of lame to talk about, at least if you don't do it in a cool way, which hopefully we are. But if you got to do it in the woe is me sense, it's not really fun to talk about. But in this episode, we saw that even if you achieve a lot of monetary success, if you put all of your hopes and dreams and your self-worth into outside validation, it is kind of a recipe for being bummed and depressed all the time because it's never enough. It's just impossible for one thing like an exit to offer all of these benefits or just kind of fulfill all these dreams that you have in life. In my opinion, life is about time and how you spend that time. It's about family. It's about providing value to those around you in as many ways as possible. It's about your social life. It's about your physical health. Fulfillment may never be just one thing. I think it's cumulative. But, and this is a mistake that I made, and we heard that Josh is fixing this mistake, a lot of times the best reason I think to start a business is to serve others or to achieve some amazing mission, not just making money. Although if you don't have a lot of money, it could be a good mission to kind of get past a certain point. But having some type of mission beyond money, I think that's the way to go. Because you're never going to feel whole from business success alone. And then if you neglect everything else in your life and it's all about business, you're not really going to get to enjoy the benefits of that business and the financial success that hopefully it brings you. And so in short, you don't get to fully appreciate the unique value that money has in one's life until you stop viewing it as the solution of all of your problems. And by the way, if you're one of those people listening to this and be like, you know what, Sam, you're telling me that making $50 million won't make me happier. You know what? Instead of trusting you, I think I should go out and find out for myself. If you're one of those people who's in the thick of it and you're building a company, you got to check out my company. It's called Hampton. It's joinhampton.com. It's my community of CEOs. You can meet all types of people just like Josh. My partner Joe and I, we vet everyone who applies. So please check it out, joinhampton.com. And last but not least, if you are an entrepreneur or you're just a company and you want a podcast just like this one, I have to give a shout out to the company who helps me make this podcast. It's called Lower Street, lowerstreet.co/Moneywise, getting that good attribution for them. So if you want a podcast like this, please check out Lower Street. They have made my life so easy making this podcast. They help me find guests. They write these scripts. They help me with the recording. Check it out, lowerstreet.co/Moneywise.